discussion as our judges are deliberating on their decisions in terms of the winners for today's challenge. May I invite the panel members to take your seat up front. These are people who are experts in LearnTech, and distinguished researchers and practitioners in the field. May I invite Professor Annabel Chen, Acting Director for the Center for Research and Development in Learning, CRADLE, Nanyang Technological University, Annabel. Professor Robert Kamei, Associate Provost Education and Director, Institute for the Application of Learning Science and Education Technology, ALSET, National University of Singapore. Mr. Roger Tan, Assistant Chief Executive Corporate Civil Service College. And our panel moderator for today, Mr. Anderson Tan, Chairman, SkillsSG Ventures. Panel members, thank you. Panel members, thank you for being on the panel today. And the topic for discussion is personalized learning. Learning science or learning experience? Would this be the future of learning? I'll now pass the mic over to Anderson, who will moderate this discussion.
Okay, thank you very much. Welcome our distinguished and very brainy speakers. Okay, and welcome to this session for all those who are present here. Right, it's really a privilege to be able to moderate this session and to be seated among the top brains in learning science. Okay, I think this topic on personalized learning, it's a very interesting area because researchers around the world have actually done different kinds of research looking at ranking the different types of learning technologies, okay, over a number of years. And time and time again, personalized learning has stood all scrutiny. Okay, so when it comes to ranking technologies towards learning, personalized learning always appear as the top choice of preference. Okay, so it's a very interesting topic because personalized learning is something that is very difficult to achieve, in my opinion. Right, and later we'd like each of these speakers to share about their thoughts, opinions, okay, and how technologies can help to achieve that. And after that, okay, I will give my point of view, okay, for our distinguished presenters, right, to argue and debate about. Right. Then after that, we will have you to ask questions. Okay, don't ask me, ask them. All right. Okay. First on the list, can I invite Annabel Chen, all right, to share your thoughts.
But before that, I just want to share with you my background. I'm actually a clinical neuropsychologist and also a cognitive neuroscientist. If you're wondering what is that and what has that to do with this. So basically, I work with individuals who have challenges with brain functions and also try to understand what their strengths and weaknesses are, and then try to help them to improve back to daily lives or to be able to adapt to the environment and surroundings or to their current jobs, depending, right? So from that aspect, I think personalized learning is very sort of like common sense to us. It's kind of a one-to-one kind of experience, but also at the same time understanding the individual's background and environment, and also providing then interventions that will work for that individual. Not everyone, but for that individual. So I don't know if that's yeah. So from that perspective, I would like to share with you my, really overview of what I see personalized learning currently, more from information from K-12 as well as its suitability for adult learning as well.
Can you hear me better? Okay, great. All right, right, so just 4 points. One is just a coverage, because you guys probably know a lot about personalized learning already. So looking at the promise that it has, and also the challenges, which I'm sure my other panel members will know that, will provide you a in-depth analysis of that. And also, how do we measure outcomes, or can we, like the importance of that? And well-suited for adult learners in terms of the way that the personalized learning is implemented. And lastly, from my perspective as a cognitive neuroscientist, it's like, what does the brain have to do with all this, right? I think that is actually my take-home message for educators as well as learners to think about knowledge about the brain. How do you implement that in your design of all these technologies for learning? So this is just a very brief overview. We know there is definitely a lot of promise, as what Anderson mentioned, for personalized learning. And this is more K-12, so like more of the school age kind of data from the US, showing that yes, you do see improvement in learners, regardless of what level you start at, what ability you start at. So that's good news. However, it will take some time to emerge. If we look at their learning achievement or outcomes, it took them like 2 years to see a strong effect for that. Just sort of shown here, like 4 semesters, so it's like 2 years. And one of the biggest challenges they see is that they have yet found really strong evidence. There is some evidence, promising, but there's still lack of evidence on which practices are most effective. And also, I think the problem, or one of the biggest challenge here, is that a lot of these are conducted, personalized learning is like one-to-one, works really well, but you have to conduct it in groups, which is the situation and environment in a traditional kind of learning environment. And that is the big challenge. How do you scale it up? Still keep the individualization and personalization. I think that's something that we will need to look forward to. And the other is measuring outcomes. So in terms of intervention, so when I was doing clinical work, one of the axioms we have as a joke, right? It's like there's so many treatments out there, so many types of intervention. So which one do you use which is the best intervention for the patient or for the client? So actually the joke was, well, the best treatment is the one that works, right? And the same thing, when we look at learning interventions, or how do we help to optimize learning, what is the best way to do it? Of course, we want to know the one that works. But how do we know that? I think it's from measuring outcomes. So what are the learning outcomes? But one of the hardest things to do in this kind of ecological educational research environment is what we call this randomized control trials, designed where you have very tight experimental control, right? One group gets it, the other doesn't, or you randomize it. It is not easy to conduct in the real world, although we do that for drug trials, for clinical work. But I think to a certain extent we need to show that at the very beginning to provide those evidence. And then what are the learning outcome measures that we want to identify to show whatever program you put together for personalized learning is effective. And also the biggest thing right now is how do we embed analytics? So as we learn, we get data, feedback on how things are going, and also the growing of big data analytics, where you hear a lot about artificial intelligence, how big data play into that. And that's where the feedback, the data can provide us feedback as you learn to inform instruction or even for self-instruction. So this is sort of like infographics from the data quality campaign. This is more for, again, K-12 kind of an environment, but it also applies to adult learning. But it's just to emphasize that it is really important. Data is really important to personalize our learning. So while we are developing all these technologies, are we also collecting data along the way to inform us as we move along? Now, this is just to show my third point, personalized learning is actually very well suited for adult learners. If you look on the left, it's sort of a summary of some of the characteristics of the adult learner. We are self-directed, we're very motivated because some of the courses we actually pay for it, right? So we really want to have high expectations that we'll get something out of it at the end. And also we're very practical and results oriented. We want to see that we get some, improvement. And we use personal experience as a resource. Also, we have a lot of other responsibilities other than learning, right? We have family, we have work, many demands around us. And also with aging, we are not as nimble or agile as we were when we were in school, right? So in a way, yes, it's slower learning, but we have more integrated knowledge. Later on, I'll show you about the brain on this. And also, I want to say less open-minded, but in a way that we learned something already through years. So it takes us we have some inertia to change or to learn new things or learn new approaches. So we need to understand why. So I think that information is very important in designing our learning environment to help the learner to know why we have to do that. Now, so matching it with personalized learning, this is really a brief overview. So the learner profiles, we do look at what is the individual strengths and weaknesses. So if we have these characteristics, we can understand that. And also building the learning paths, making it meaningful for the individual as they choose the components of the program. And also based on their ability, what they came from, what do they have currently, the prerequisites. And the most important thing is having the ability to have a flexible learning environment, which is very important for the adult learner. Okay, very quickly. Now, what has the brain got to do with this, right? So I think the important thing is with the development of technology as well in the healthcare, we have like so-called non-invasive brain imaging. We can actually look at the living brain and see how it works right now without doing any invasive autopsy or surgery, right? So one thing, we know this is both information about cognitive neuropsychology as well as a lot of studies put together looking at different cognitive functions. This is age from 20s all the way to 80s. You can see where you are at that. But the lines are showing the green and blue, looking at more what we call fluid intelligence, so speed of processing, working memory, and also some of them are long-term memory. You can see there's a decline going on there. So the brain is changing, okay? You may be dismayed and you try to look at what age am I at, right? But the good news is the red lines here is looking at world knowledge. It actually sustains over time and even improves. So for those of you who are here, you're young and agile, good for you. But those of us who are here, we are older and wiser, okay? So that actually could provide you information on how you design your analytics or your components of technologies for learning. Now this is just to share an example of how the brain information from the brain could help. This is a study that we did a few years ago looking at brain activations while between young and older people. Just to make it really simple, this can be quite overwhelming. But basically, we put people in the MRI scanner and look at their brain activity while we presented images that either are new or repeated with many cycles. And what we found is that for the younger subjects, they were able to adapt to the repeating images really quickly. So like in the second block of repetition, they sort of had increased activations already. But for the older subjects, although the performance is the same, but they only adapt to it at like somewhere around the fifth cycle or so. So it takes time. So the question is, we all know repetition helps, but to what extent, for which population, what age group? Those are variables that we can inform from cognitive neuroscience. So this is a summary slide, the last slide on personalized learning with our adaptive brain. So knowledge from neurodevelopment could help us to understand what kind of roles the instructor can play. So if you understand about neurodevelopment, you think about the K to 12 ages. So kids, their executive function, so the brain function that helps them to organize, things, and also for metacognition, that's really important. It's still developing. So the instructor may want to have more of a role of providing more structure, or the technology that you make for the personalized learning program would provide more structure for those different age groups. But if they're adult already, we assume they're mature, right? So they can organize all that themselves. But however, we need to also take note of the aging brain, as I showed earlier. So how it can inform, like if your tasks have a lot of processing speed or working memory, and stuff like that, you may want to have more scaffolding in those areas, and or use their previous resources, experience to learn a new concept. And lastly, knowledge about the adaptive brain. So understanding knowledge from the cognitive science about how the brain works actually gives us more precision in the personalization of our learning. And for the future, I think this is sort of like stepping even more forward, and is, can we actually use the knowledge from the brain, so online information from the brain, while the individual is learning as a feedback on how they learn. So this is almost what we call brain-computer interface. And they are already doing that for challenge groups such as people with attention problems, and all that. They are training their attention using this neurofeedback. So similarly, can we use some kind of program inside our personalized learning to look at this? So this is sort of my future perspective.
Thank you, Annabel, for the very interesting brainy insights. Right, can I invite Robert to share your thoughts?
Thank you. Just as a bit about my background, I'm a pediatrician. I was at the University of California, San Francisco as a faculty member, and I helped, my interest in medicine was in education, health education. So now 13 years ago, I was recruited by Duke University to come here to Singapore and help start medical school in Singapore, Duke US Medical School. And what we did at the time was we tried to use learning sciences to be able to put together the way that we trained our students. So we did that in a way that was quite different than the traditional way of teaching medical students. We flipped the classroom. That was not an expression that had developed by that time. So we made our students learn ahead of time for classes, and then in the classroom we had them use that knowledge that they learned prior to the class and apply it to clinical situations. We had them do it as individuals and in teams. It was a very unusual way of training medical students. It garnered a lot of attention. We had constant stream of visitors seeing how we taught our medical students, lecturing to them in class. And it was a very active classroom. And it actually ended up changing the way that Duke University trained its medical students back in the United States. And then about 2.5 years ago, I was asked by the then Provost, now President of NUS, to see if I can help bring some of the learning science principles to education at NUS as well. So I'm a practitioner, I'm not so much a researcher, but my job was to start ALSET, which is a research institute around learning sciences. We're very practical oriented. We're very much interested, since I'm a practitioner, how learning sciences works in actually the classroom. And so one of the strategies that we took was to be very data driven. So we've really been responsible for bringing all of the educational data at NUS, which is considerable, and try and bring it together, and then ask researchers from different disciplines. We have psychologists, we have economists, we have the IT, network analysis, Facebook, social media type guys, and we have neuroscientists like Annabel looking at the data to try to make sense and try and have insights about how learners learn better at NUS. We also teach a course to students about metacognition, about learning sciences, thinking about thinking, and helping them be better learners themselves. And so I think that's the standing point where I'm going to base some of my comments today. I think that we all have a comfort with personalized learning because we've been doing that in terms of tutoring individual coaches forever, right? We've had, and there's good evidence that an individual tutor can really help a learner move forward. But with the advent of technology, of large databases, of artificial intelligence, we have the opportunity to really scale, as Annabel said, really scale personalized learning in ways that we couldn't really think about doing before. What I wanted to just briefly talk about today, though, is that it's important to think about what's driving this personalization. And no, at NUS, we count on student feedback in a large amount in terms of judging the quality of our education. But I would say that from the learning sciences standpoint, learners themselves can judge quite well their experience of learning, but they're not so good about judging how much they learn. Okay? So just as a whole, how many of you have, when they talk about learning styles, you know, that people learn better visually or auditory or spatially or by reading, how many of you have a learning style that you think you have? Visual learning or auditory? Just any? See a few hands. I think when I ask my students at NUS, Duke NUS, almost 80% of them say I have a natural preference to a particular learning style. I know that I feel like I'm better at visually looking at something and then remembering it. So many of us have that sort of style, but when they try to implement that and use that particular learning style and say, do people actually learn better that way? They've never really been able to show that it's been effective. And other ideas there is that I think all of us as faculty want to make learning easier for our students. We really want to make it decrease the barriers to understanding. But sometimes that might be actually counterproductive. So for example, disfluency is things that's studied by the psychologists. And it's that if you make it, so there was this large study where it took a large high school, and it had classes in chemistry, physics, and English, and a few others. It had 2 of them. In one class, they changed all of the PowerPoint slides and all of the written material into a font that was hard to read. Okay? So the students had to work harder to read the slides. What do you think group did better in terms of learning and retention of that material? I think we'd all like to think that the easier it is to learn, the better we learn. But in fact, the students in the disfluent condition, the condition where they were getting fonts that were harder to read, actually retained better. So there's been multiple studies in learning sciences where learners would judge learning very differently than actually the learning outcomes. And I tell our students, easy in, easy out, because the students are always trying to find the easy way to learn the material. But what happens is it may come in for a short period of time, but it doesn't last very long, and for long-term learning, it's not so good. So that's why I think a lot of the pushes of personalized learning has to be outcomes-based, but you have to make sure you understand what's the right outcomes. Some of so for instance, lecturing has not been really shown to be, if you're passive with a lecture, you don't really retain it. But if you're active with it, if you're asking questions to yourself as you're listening, or taking notes, or anticipating, or as the Duke NUS students, preparing ahead of time for what's going on, what the faculty is going to talk about, then you'll learn deeper in a deeper way. And so, so personalized learning has to do more than just ask the learner, did you like it? It has to be able to follow how well they're doing and what they're doing as they're learning. So it ends up being quite complicated task to be able to ask a computer or artificial intelligence to be able to properly guide a student. So for instance, a lot of the personalized learning, or at least some of it, is self-paced, can be self-paced, okay? And I want to distinguish self-paced to be very different than being flexibly placed. I think we all would recognize that we, as opposed to the industrial education where everyone in the class learns at the same pace, which is probably not ideal, having also then trying to pace on the person's viewpoint may not necessarily be ideal, because we tend to try to naturally try to minimize our brain activity. We try naturally to be passive with the material. I ask our students, they really want to be just told in a lecture what to know. But I say, no, you actually have to think with the material. And I just finished giving them a lot of learning sciences to try and convince them the way to really understand this material is not just to sit back there and listen to a lecture, which most of my students in Singapore are very used to, but instead, how do you actively engage with the activity? And they complain about actively engage about it oftentimes. They often say, oh, I'm learning, this is hard work, just make it easier for me. But in fact, we know from the learning sciences that that's a mistake. So if a personalized learning engine is smart enough to be able, as a coach would be, to push appropriately students, to challenge them appropriately, not too far, because then it overwhelms them and demoralizes them, but also not just rely on their ideas of what good learning is, because that may not be pushing them hard enough, but then is able to, using data, looking at outcomes of learning, be able to coach students and push them in, as Vygotsky, if you follow learning theory, about the zone of proximal development. If you stay in this particular zone, then you really optimize learning in a way that I think we're looking for. The gamers do this really, really well. If a game is too easy, everyone hates it, because everyone gets bored with it very easily, and you don't buy it. If a good game is too hard, then no one buys it, because they say this is impossible to do. So the gamers really understand this, because they're always in the zone of proximal development quite naturally. And so we have to do more of that in the way that personalized learning does, as the gamers do. And if we're able to do that, then we'll start to achieve what we're trying to do with this. But just go back to my main point, is that I think that we have to use what we know about learning and learning sciences to really guide this, even though the data is not that good yet in terms of personalized learning. It's still in its infancy. There's a lot of room to grow. But we have to, as we're doing this, as we're experimenting with personalized learning, we have to be able to study the outcomes clearly and use those outcomes to then drive improvements in our learning and improvements for individuals as well as systems that we create.
Thank you, Robert, for the very interesting practitioner side of applied learning perspective. Okay, can I invite Roger to share the application side?
Okay, hi, can you hear me? Hi, a very good afternoon to all of you. Just want to thank the opportunity to be here to share. Just now I can just talk about the top grades. I think these two are the grades. I think I'm the hand, okay? I definitely not the top grade, okay? Where I come from a civil service college, so I'm a humble civil servant. So I thought I was a practitioner, but anyway. So I guess the way they arrange the paper is quite nicely. First we have Annabel, with the full professor, academician. Then we have Bob here, who is half professor, half practitioner. For me, I guess I'm a full practitioner. So I'm not going to tell you about all the cheap stuff about learning sizes and how the brain works. I'll probably share more from how, as an employer, how do we try to implement personalized learning in an organization. And I'll say in this case, a fairly large organization. So we, as a civil service college, we look after the learning needs of the entire public service. So the public service in Singapore has a workforce of about 145,000. So basically, we are the central training institution. We look after all the leadership and management, skills development, all the public administration kind of stuff. And of course, at the agencies level, as well as the ministries or state board, they have their own specialized training institution. So we kind of look at things that cut across things like leadership management, public administration such as HR, finance, procurement, etc. So that's where we are. So echoing what our earlier panel members has talked about, personalized learning is not new, and it's something that we have been trying to do for quite a long time. But actually, we couldn't get it done until quite recently. In the last 3 to 4 years, then with the technology being available, we are now able to do it in a more systematic way. So in fact, I'm pleased to let you know that actually in 2 weeks' time, by the end of November, 30th of November, we're going to launch our own digital learning platform that will enable personalized learning for our public officers, 145,000 of them, where they can have access to learning materials on this portal anytime, anywhere. So that's where we are heading towards. So why did we do this? CSC, what we have been doing in the past, I would say we are a very traditional school, probably not unlike many organizations, many even our own schools. Where the way we train our public officers is like really the conventional way. We sit in now in a classroom, we have a trainer or a lecturer in front, and then they teach them for a couple of days to a couple of weeks. Programs happen at specific time in the year. So for example, if I'm a new officer, I come into the public service. As public officer, how many of you here are public officers, by the way? None. Apart from our IAL colleagues, yes. Oh, none, okay. So we can imagine the public service is this entire workforce, 145,000, and they have to learn all kinds of things. And then in Singapore, we are quite particular about all these things about transparency, corruption, etc., etc. So procurement, for example, is a very big thing for us. Okay, we need to ensure that whatever things we buy, we purchase using taxpayers' money, we need to be above board and blah blah blah. So there's a whole set of rules, very complicated rules that our public officers need to learn. And from day one, when they come in, they have to learn about that. Okay, how do they put up papers to justify to buy certain things? Okay, and the problem is that for CSC, we run our procurement courses like every 2 months, once. So if you happen to miss one, and then usually it's long queue lah. So by the time you come in, you probably have to wait 6 months. And so it's a very difficult kind of example. So we have to find a way where we can reach out to all our public officers and make all this learning available to them anytime, anywhere, as and when they need it, they can learn. So this is one of the key motivations for us why we are doing this. Essentially, we have this platform where all our learning materials will be on it, and you can go online to learn it as and when you need it. Okay, so that's how we are trying to personalize things. I would say it has also been enabled by the fact that apart from technology, there's a lot of content providers out there today. Okay, so that has been a big plus for us. So all these big players like Coursera, Udemy, or even LinkedIn have actually come on board, and we have a lot of this whole catalog of courses that we can tap on. So CSC now plays a role, apart from developing our own. We purchase all these materials, because we are then the demand aggregator, so we make it available for the entire public service, all 145,000 employees. And our role is also then to help curate the learning materials. Okay, so that's what we have been doing. So wish us luck as we launch it, soft launch it in 2 weeks' time. The actual launch will come next year. Okay. So along the way, as we were embarking on this journey of trying to make learning personable, personalized for our learners, accessible anytime, anywhere, we discovered that actually a lot of these concepts that we talk about are easy to say, not easy to do. Things about data. For example, things about data. It's not a straightforward thing. Okay? In fact, when you have to start actually do it, you find that it's extremely challenging. We started the journey, even just getting ready for the launch. We started the journey of building our own data warehouse almost 3 years ago, where we have to kind of clean up all our different data sources that come from everywhere to put them all together. We have to build the IT infrastructure to enable all this data to be stored securely, especially in today's environment where you can get hacked anytime, anywhere as well. So that was a humongous effort, and I would say that we are still nowhere there. And I would actually be able to actually empathize with maybe smaller organizations. If you think about the government or the public service, with all the resources that it has, it's having so much problem trying to put together some of this. I can only imagine that some of these things it's easy to talk about it as a concept. Actually, for SMEs and smaller companies, is at this stage still out of their reach. Because the technology is also not cheap, while it's available, it's not cheap. So yeah, so that's one of the points. The other thing that we noted very interestingly that in the real world, people actually do behave differently. That's about learners' motivation. We seem to have different personalities. At work and at home is different. At home, every one of us play with our Facebook, our Instagram, but then when it comes to work, they almost like suddenly forgot about it, that there's all these things. They refuse to do all these things. So again, we find very interesting behavior, which we are still trying to grapple with. So when we go out to do our own surveys with our stakeholders, especially all the directors of HR directors of the different ministry or state boards, every one of them will all say, yeah, very good. We want all this personalized learning. We want our employees to learn anytime, anywhere, etc. But then when we do the same survey on our employees, they all say, I don't want to do it. Okay, but yet they still serve your Facebook. They will on their own do their own online learning on topics that probably not related to work. They're quite happy to do that. But for some strange reason, when it comes to work, they are not prepared to do that. So that's still something that we are grappling with. In fact, we have already, even before this official launch of the platform, we have already launched a pilot platform for the last 1 year. And I must say, the reception is not encouraging at all. But we have faith and we are plowing on, But the truth of the matter is that the students don't quite like it for some strange reason. Even though you tell them that this is your personalized, your needs, your goals, etc. But to them somehow it's not quite aligned. Yeah. Yeah, then the other thing is really the last point, that the challenges that we face is that we then find that actually the way we assess whether we have been using taxpayers' money properly, measuring the outcomes, again, is a very, to us, a very complicated thing. Whatever that we have learned in the past from classroom, learning all the KPIs, all the different metrics, actually doesn't apply anymore. So in the classroom, you measure things like whether you have completed this course, how many, whether you have completion. But in the personalized learning, we realize that when people go through your online learning, they can finish 1/3 of it, they decided that I don't like it, they stop it and they move on to another course. So how then do you measure whether you are getting your returns? That's a question that our stakeholders, all the directors of personnel from the ministry are asking us, how can you assure me that whatever money that I plunk into your learning system is giving me returns? Which we are now still scratching our head as to how do you measure it in this personalized learning kind of environment where people basically almost like watching YouTube, you don't like it, you move on. Then how do you actually measure, is it effective or not effective, and things like that. So these are some of the challenges that I definitely hope to learn from the audience as well as from our distinguished panel, how to overcome some of these real world problems. Yeah, thank you.
I will respond. Yes.
Thank you, Roger, for the sharing. In fact, we have heard from the researcher, we have heard from the practitioner, and I come Roger as the application of whatever that they have learned. In fact, what Roger has shared leads very nicely into what I want to share. Okay? I'm more of a contrarian. So now you're going to hear from a contrarian. To me, words matter. Okay? Personally, when I look at the word personalized learning, I don't quite agree. Can I have the slides? Okay? I don't quite agree with personalized learning. In fact, I think that personalized learning, at best, very difficult to achieve, at worst, not achievable. Okay, and to me, personalized learning is actually stating the obvious. Learning by itself is already very personalized. You don't have to tell people to do it. Right? Maybe we are confused with personalized teaching. Okay, and I think there is a difference between teaching and learning. Alright, because I can teach you, but you don't learn. Alright, or I can don't teach you and you learn. Okay, so learning by definition is really a very personal enterprise kind of a thing. Okay, you choose what you want to learn. So like what Roger said, right? You can plan all these fantastic technology and you think that they will learn 1, 2, 3, but they learn 5, 6, 7. Okay? Perhaps we should be talking really about personalized teaching. Right? So that Roger will not have his KPI messed up. Okay, somebody say, hey, you know, how is this guy learning? But actually, all the efforts are actually invested into the teaching process. But even if we were to achieve personalized teaching and be successful in that, would actually that create holes that don't fit the pants? Because how do you actually know how people actually learn? Right? This is where Annabel say, okay, you have all these big data and what do you call that? Human computer, that kind of thing that will give feedback. Okay, and using functional MRI to scan the brain as it is thinking and learning and allowing researchers to look into the brain while it's functioning. Okay? So there are a lot of these kind of things. How do we know how people actually learn? Alright. And the next thing is, will personalized teachings actually result in siloed learnings that might ultimately become tunnel vision, in fact lack relevancy? A little bit back to how do we know that what we are teaching is not actually reinforcing the negatives. You know, now there's a huge debate over fake news. You teach fake things and they become real, that kind of a thing. Okay? So how does our effort to personalize the teaching, right? In this case I don't use learning, right? How does our effort and investment to personalizing teaching actually create something negative? Okay, I'm sure some of you would have seen this or read this news article some days ago. It talks about mobile phone repair shops in Singapore having a fix to stay relevant as technology develops. Okay, how many of you actually read this article? Alright, so how do mobile phone repairers keep relevant to the ever-changing technology? Right, the phone manufacturers are not going to teach them, okay, because these are the guys who take away their other side of the revenue, right? Phone replacement. Okay, so one of these entrepreneurs actually mentioned this. The budding entrepreneur shared that everything he knows about fixing phones is self-taught. There is no personalization teaching. Okay? This means seeking out support groups and forums, then blah blah blah. Alright? Knowledge sharing seems to be the main way skills of the trade are picked up. Again, there are no personalized teaching here. But interestingly, if you read between the lines, there is a whole lot of personalization of learning. He personalizes it himself. He decides what is the phone model, which part of the phone, right? Newer ones are usually given theoretical briefings on the types of faults and the likely causes and allowed to practice on dummy sets before moving on to customer devices only when confident, but with supervision. So maybe that's a little bit of a personalized teaching there. Okay? Whether you say there's a personalized learning, I mean, that's for you to argue. Okay, I want to show this little video. I'm sure many of you would have seen it. It is about this Cambodian boy. His name is Taksin. Today I just discovered his name is Taksin. Right? Please.
英文、泰国、日本、韩国、法国。
Oh, may aku.
Si. Boleh orang panggil pada aku orang Wow.
Con không nói đấy. Đấy là sao đấy con?
Dạ cô nhà mình bị cầm lấy cô tiền. Phải chơi hoặc cậu đi chơi cậu mua quên đâu tiền.
Apparently can speak 15 languages.
Kau kau dapat ikut leader tu. Kau dapat buat ikut. Kau mai ikut lah ikut matching lah. Mày ui cô và唱歌给你听。Thầy đây. Đây. 就是น้องอันน้องเปาพีน้องอันร้อยบาท แม็กเน็กไม่แพงโทนะ就是น้องอันน้องพีสวยไม่มีสตังค์ไปโรงเรียนนี่มีเหมือนกัน5 อัน 2 เรียนไอ้นี่อย่าทำตัวเองมากก่อน3 อันเอาซื้อ5 อัน $2 5 อัน $2 ไทยไม่ได้
Speak other language.
Chinese
Okay.
你要买一个啦，5个2块钱，买一个我唱歌给你听。我们不一样，每个人都有不同的境遇。我们在这里买东西给你，我们不一样，虽然会经历不同的事情，我们同是光，来生还能上帝。OK 吗？谢谢。好，买一个啦。
OK，我买。
5个2块美金。
等一下，你们选嘛？
你再选一下。
感能力等的。
5个2块啊，好便宜的。
Apa Espanyol?
Señorita Papa. Muy bonito, muy barato. Candora mucho bello. Compré uno imán $52.
Wow. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, muchos. Es grande. Muy big. Wow.
10.
Mucho. Wait. So you speak German?
German 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Who teach you all this?
I learn from tourists.
Sorry. Oh.
Philippines I can speak also.
Selamat.
Salamat. Ante maganda. Bili isa, bula pera, punya susu. Bula pera, bula sewa, bula anak.
Can you speak Melayu?
Malaysia?
Yes.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Wah, sangat pandai ya.
Okay.
When I saw this video, the first thing that came to my mind is, did anybody personalize the teaching to him? No. So when he went up to the tourist, when he asked the tourist, can you personalize something for me? No, right? He'll just perhaps ask the tourist, how do you say 1 to 10 in Spanish, for example? Okay? And he personalized his own learning for one objective, and that is to sell. Including he personalized the song. Alright? So this thing about personalized learning, I think, in my opinion, doesn't really exist. Okay, on our side as an educator, but it exists at the individual learner level. So if we try very hard, alright, to invest in personalized learning, maybe we are barking at the wrong tree. We should be looking at personalized teaching so that the outcome measurement indicators will not be a bit difficult to correlate. Okay, so that's my point of view. And with that, I want to open the discussion. All right, first to I know Robert was ready to answer and respond to Roger, so perhaps we'll start with him.
I was just going to comment that how in medicine we have a history of continuing medical education, and initially it was where the doctor figured out what they were interested in learning. Typically, what cruise that they can go on to get the lecture, or some vacation or ski spot that they can go to hear the lecture. And then they would get the lecture, and then they would leave, and they would collect a certain amount of CME points to be able to see a license. Okay. What was found was that the doctors generally didn't learn anything, did not actually learn that much from these lectures. We tested them. And then when they worked harder to get them to learn something, they actually found that they rarely used what they learned in their practice and implemented it. So CME is evolving now to where they're looking at actual physician practice, and they're saying, okay, I'm a pediatrician, so let's say my immunization rate of my patient population is only 70%, and it should be 97. What is the information that I'm lacking? That's why my immunization rate isn't so high. And then should be given that information. And then what I could be done is tested later on to see if my immunization rate in my clinic is improved. So I think especially it's come up a bit about workplace education. Increasingly, the outcomes that we want as our work will serve as outcomes for the kind of ongoing educational programs that we either volunteer to take or assign to take. And I think as that all gets integrated, we'll start to answer some of these questions that you had. Is how do I show that my educational programs are of benefit? Okay? So one way to evaluate educational programs, the Kirkpatrick sort of framework, is that one, did you like it, which is the lowest form? Did you actually learn something? Did you actually implement whether or not you learned it? And then if you implement it, did it actually make a difference? So that's the gold standard for the evaluation of our educational programs. And increasingly, we're going to need to start to show that it made a difference in the work that we do. So that was my comment, just medical experiences.
Would like to get on to that?
Just now, Anderson talked about personalized teaching versus personalized learning. I found that to be a useful distinction to make. Actually, US they define this field of personalized learning. They distinguish between three different concepts. One is individualization, one is differentiation, and the last one is personalization. Actually, just now when we talk about it on this topic of personalized learning, we seem to kind of mix everything up into one basket. And I think Anderson rightly pointed out, actually there is a subtle difference. So in this distinction between the three terms, individualization and differentiation are actually probably very close to the concept of personalized learning. Because in individualization or differentiation, it's teacher-centered, and the learning goals are actually the same. That means we want the students to learn all the same thing. By individualization, the teachers will then tailor the learning to the pace where the students can accept. So a bit like our streaming system where you got some of our students cannot learn as fast, they kind of go into a different stream. Differentiation is really the learning goals remains the same, but the way in which you teach, you differentiate. So some people may learn better through visual, some people may learn better through auditory means. Then you differentiate and you use different methods. Then the last concept that they talk about, personalization, is probably closer to what we have been talking about. And that is more learner-centered, in the sense that the learner basically decides based on his or her own interest, what to learn, when to learn, how to learn. Okay, and then that doesn't, so I guess then, I think it's useful to make that distinction when we talk about it. And we will then integrate better with what the organization wants versus what the employee wants. Today we may not have quite integrated very well, as in the organization wants the employees to learn a set of skills that is useful for the organization. But that may not be what the employees want to learn, unless you have the proper reward structure in place and well integrated in the sense that you will find that the two objectives can be better aligned.
I think it's really interesting that you bring up about the interaction between teaching and learning. I think it's also with the evolution of times and technology as it's ongoing. I mean, in the older days, why we have the teachers because of knowledge gatekeeper, right? So there's some kind of knowledge the teacher has and the student doesn't. But nowadays, we know knowledge is everywhere. In fact, we're overwhelmed with it in the Internet of Things. So from that aspect, you can think of it two ways as well. I think Roger made it very clearly. I think that's very nicely put. Having these components in mind as you design your learning program, I think is very important. But on the other hand, is also thinking about, so from both sides. So like what the learner needs, like what Robert was saying, it's very goal-oriented. So it's like, are you learning, what's that information you need to hit that target, right? So you have a goal to go forward. So this, to a certain extent, for adults, is a very self-directed kind of learning, to seek out information or to seek out strategies to get where you want to go. But on the other hand, if we talk about teacher, instructor, how do they play into this? It doesn't mean that they no longer have a role or anything. In fact, it's like, how do they help? So they are more seen as an agent. So like the word, you like words, you have pedagogy and andragogy, right? So peda is like where the child is leading, andragogy is the adult is leading. So whether you're a child or adult, but as a learner, you're actually leading your own learning in that sense. But the teacher is facilitating to some extent. But in order to know how to facilitate, I think that's the key, that where different areas of knowledge from learning sciences, or what I would say science of learning as well, from learning more about how brain functions, could contribute to that precision. So how much to facilitate, how much to let self-directed learning to occur, and what components from technology could be put in place to help to integrate this, or as well as the data that's really required as we go along this journey. I think that's actually the challenge of going forward.
Thank you so much. Annabel just introduced something else, right? First you said learning science and the science of learning. Again, different, huh? Okay. All right, now shall we invite questions from the floor, please? Please introduce your name and yes.
Hi, Roger Wagner. Roger, I was really interested in your comments about evaluating the transfer of learning to the workplace. I was kind of curious, what things have you tried or seen or considered trying to evaluate that learning in the workplace?
For us, we have a way of evaluating it for our classroom learning, essentially using the Kirkpatrick model, and then for selected so-called high investment program, such as some of the management program, we then track the participants over time. So beyond level 1 and 2, we also go on to level 3 and 4, usually over a 6 months to a 1 year period. So that's for classroom type of learning. For digital, we have just started. We are still actually trying to figure out what we should be tracking in order to demonstrate that the transfer of learning. Yes. So I don't yet have an answer for that. Yeah. But I'm still trying to figure out what is the right matrix that we should select.
Do you have the opportunity to go into get data from the workforce? That's a civil service college, since you're affiliated with all these civil service.
Yes. So I mean, we can work with public agencies to collect some of these data. I guess the challenge for us is in this in digital learning, where we roll out personalized learning through some of these online platforms. I guess the kind of matrix that we need to track will be a bit different. I mean, like the example that I raised earlier, because the way we are structured is to allow public officers to access whatever learning materials that they want on our platform. And it's almost like making it like a YouTube video. So the traditional way where you look at course completion, we find that that's no longer relevant, because over the last 1 year, we find that there are a lot of people who sign up for 100 courses, but then after that, in the course of 1 year, they finish like 10%. There are people who, all kinds of things. So we find that whatever that we do in the classroom does not apply in the digital anymore. So we are still trying to find what is a suitable way to measure the outcome.
Yeah, and maybe that even though they took only 10% of the class, that's enough for what they need in their work. So just because they don't actually complete the course or get the degree doesn't necessarily mean it didn't help them.
Okay.
So, but you have a real unique ability to then track people in ways that universities don't, because we can't get out to all of the employers of our graduates. So it's really, to me, it's an incredible opportunity with your data systems. It just will take a while. These things are hard and messy. Yeah.
Questions?
My name is Elton. I just wanted to inquire about the examples you showed earlier from Sanderson about the mobile phones and how did they learn through the revenue model. So I'm just curious, like if let's say you transfer similar concept of like one mobile phone, which is a hardware kind of skill set, to something like emotional training, like customer service, for example, would it be a similar way of learning, or would it be like a various models to implement to make it more cost effective? So let's say for an organization like us, we want to make a return of investment of a customer learning experience or employment experience. So maybe any panels can address that.
Thank you for asking the question, but my caveat in the beginning, disclaimer was don't ask me.
Yes.
Anyone wants to?
If I understand you correctly, you're saying transfer and looking at emotional learning or regulation?
How to manage like emotional barrier, because some of the hard skills is just learn like SOP.
Right. So it's almost like more abstract concepts, right? These are very hands-on. Yeah, I think you make a very good point that not all training in one dimension fits. That's where it makes research in this area very interesting, but at the same time very challenging. So we can't just fit one model to all, although there is some principles to that. I think if you want to look at emotions, I guess from my more of the cognitive science perspective, you can understand like how emotion works in the brain, and then build up the technology that you need to do the training. But again, there's more to that. It's like we still need to test out, like, so is it, when you say personalized learning, right? Certain concepts, certain situations work for one person, but when you talk about emotional regulation, yes, there's individuals, but as well as social interactions. So group learning is also very important. I mean, there are studies showing, this is going more into babies now, okay? Looking at just babies watching a cartoon or something that's ongoing on the screen versus one baby versus two babies. One baby, so they measure how baby react by sucking, right? So one baby, they have some reaction, but then if you put just two babies side by side, they're not interacting with each other, but like the sucking rate actually goes up. So there's something about just sitting beside, next to an individual that's for your opinion. So things like that we still have to study, just like to understand, like for example, emotional regulation. How does that work, or does that actually promote some kind of learning as well? So another area that we're also looking into is how does emotion helps with learning or not? So emotion and learning. And in fact, there are theories out there in acquiring language. We actually need emotions to learn that as infants, from infancy and so on. So there is, yes, probably a lot more work to be done.
My comment to that really interesting question is that I think that we can't expect formal education to teach everything that we want our learners to have. There's in medical education, there's something we call the hidden curriculum, and that's where people learn a lot from the way that their faculty member interacts with other people, the way that they talk to patients,